Well, good afternoon. It's Richard Pears from Finextra TV, and today I'm going to be joined by David Marriage. Hello, David.
Hi Richard, how are you?
Very good, thank you. Now, as we know, as investors and consumers are increasingly demanding, portfolios and products and services that protect the planet, same time the investment industry seems to be thrashing itself to death debating greenwashing and the merits of ESG. So at Finextra, we're always trying to discuss better data, specifically, the data from supply chains, forward-looking dynamic data that's going to give us this truth. And as I say, delighted to be joined by David. He's going to give us some insights here today with regard to Rewired.earth, which is a collaborative effort to address this. Now, David is the Head of Innovation Disruption for Sustainability at PwC. So David, tell us, what is this Rewired.earth thing?
So, and thanks Richard for having me on. Rewired.earth is, as you say, a market collaboration. It's a community interest company, so it's a not-for-profit. And really what it's trying to look at is some of the issues that you've described around essentially the data collection around impact and understanding the real impact of an organization or a product or an investment in a way that's accessible to investors and consumers, but also, if you like, governments and citizens in terms of what's happening in a particular location or company. And it's one of the things it's been trying to understand is why are some of the market incentives, if you like, wrong, and what sorts of things need to be put in place to make sure that they become better. So that's essentially where sort of Rewired.earth started, and I think where it's moving to, and we can talk about this in a bit, is actually one of the real issues is the business case for sustainability. At the moment, corporate boards and asset managers, there's almost a difference between sustainability and value. Sustainability at one end of the spectrum directly opposed to value. Sustainability being some sort of overhead or philanthropic action or regulatory burden. And each time you spend money, it's obviously reducing the value case for your organization. So actually, how do you start to bring the business case in for sustainability with much more clarity such that businesses can act?
And so there's this whole thing, if you're in the financial services industry, which is you're getting data to really just assess your own risk of your portfolios and report it to the regulator. And then there's the risk equation, which is actually what's going to be the things you perhaps invest in, which are genuinely going to change impact in the material world. So in terms of that spectrum, what is the data information, a gap, if you like, that you're seeking to address?
Yeah, I suppose the best way to describe it is the issue the market's facing, if that makes sense. And the issue the market's facing is essentially a rapid shift in demand. It's never really had sort of shift in demand in the past. So if I just describe that quickly, so historically as a consumer, we'd come to the market looking for high quality product, low price, and as an investor, we'd look for high return, low risk. And essentially that's been the check and balance on the market for time immemorial. But increasingly, we're seeing consumers coming to the market looking for high quality product, low price, while saving the planet and society, and they'll take into account the impact of those products when they're making that purchase decision. And as investors, increasingly, we're seeing investors saying, well, actually, I still want high return, low risk, but I want to save the planet and society when I'm making my investment decisions. And we're seeing a massive increase in ESG funds. So, and if you look at the Bloomberg numbers for 2025, they talk about 50 trillion of ESG mandates. So the issue, though, for the market is that because of the long-term historic ask, the market has been optimized on that. It's been optimized on essentially the consumer and investor ask that used to be.
Yeah.
And so if you think about the finance data, we've got really good transparency. We've got transparency through the supply chain right from the start. It's got every cost and every profit captured in one number at the top of that supply chain, that essentially the cost on the invoice. Those invoices we bring together with the revenues of our sales, and we create financial statements, and those are in IFRS standards. And so we know what's in every balance and every note. Those can then be audited by the auditors. So there's a third-party validation, and those are then given to the market on a particular day, such that everybody has democratic access to that data. The issue is that none of that is true for sustainability data at the moment. So we don't have the transparency through the supply chain. We don't know our carbon footprint at every level because it doesn't flow through to us. We don't know whether the cobalt in our phones, for example, was mined by a small child who had every chance of being injured that day versus an adult whose child's in school, who's got access to fair pay and all the health and safety equipment they need. And until we know that, we don't know our social impact. So actually, the key here is actually starting to really create that transparency. But what we tend to do is, because we don't know, as corporates and asset managers, we create a sustainability statement. And those sustainability statements are mostly qualitative, and they're interpreted by MSCI and Bloomberg and Refinitiv and the like. And it's really difficult to interpret those consistently because there is no standard. And so for the same company, there may be different views coming from these organizations with best intentions, but it's just consistency is difficult without the framework. They can't be audited because there is no standard in the way that we'd like them to be with sort of financial equivalence, if you like. And they're drip fed into the market to the users based on those organizations that can afford to pay for sustainability data. So it's not democratically accessible. And so what that ends up with is firstly, a lack of a consistency in the market, given that we know sustainable data is price sensitive, it moves the share price. So it's difficult to get that consistent frame, but it means that boards can't communicate effectively what their equity story is because it's almost managed by somebody else. The transparency that asset managers and investors and consumers need isn't there because the data doesn't exist. And so we come up with some good market proxies, but that drives, if you like, market incentives that drive the wrong behavior as well. So, if you think about, the more I look through my supply chain currently as a corporate and identify all the issues that I've got, the worse I look compared to someone who hasn't bothered looking.
Yeah.
And the more I try and identify as an asset manager investments that are bad in terms of funding and transition to make them good, I look worse on a Morningstar than someone who's just identified funds that are or assets that are already good from an ESG perspective. So it means that the behaviors that we need to see in the market aren't driven, and therefore the response in terms of sustainability, even though the demand is there, is not coming through in the way we'd like to see.
Yeah, and it's a good summary for anyone that's not been following. But I guess we've been through that conversation quite a bit, and we know that there are a lot of initiatives to resolve that. Through be it standards or through private company initiatives, etc. Why is Rewired.earth going to do anything different to all the other initiatives we've reported on Finextra? What are you doing? How are you doing it to resolve that well put problem?
Well, I think what PwC and other sort of collaborators around it is quite a broad market collaboration, like about the sort of Rewired.earth approach, is that it's not just focused on the measurement. And if you think about a lot of the activities that are going on, it's about capturing the impact data. But there's lots of different ways of doing that, as you mentioned. I mean, I could list all of the acronyms, and I won't, because I think everybody probably has heard them multiple times. But the difference is that this starts to create the value pools that exist in the market, and it does that by looking at the demand side as well as the impact side. So if I talk to you about ESG and say, if we take the Sustainable Development Goals as an example, and I said, so do you care about climate action, and do you care about life on land and gender equality, etc.? Unless you're some sort of sociopath, you tend to say, yeah, I care about that. Now the issue with that is that if you care about everything, we don't really know what you care about most. And that means it's really difficult to act, if you like, from an investor perspective or a corporate perspective. So what Rewired.earth essentially creates is a view of what are the 4 things you really care about in the 16 SDGs that we're focused on. What are the 4 things you care about? What are the 4 things you care about a little? And what are the 4 things you care about but later? You care about them all, but you care about them at different levels of priority. Now, as Rewired.earth collects that for investors and consumers, citizens and employees, we start to get a sense of where does the pension assets sit in terms of care? What's the free cash flow of the consumer markets, discretionary spend, if you like, of where are people that are making decisions? How are they thinking about spending that money? Where do people want to work? Where does people that increasingly want to work for a purposeful organization actually accessing the right employees and what they care about? But also from a governmental perspective, what do the public care about, and what mandate are they prepared to give government around the values that they hold around climate, for example, or equality? Now, because Rewired.earth is in creating that framework, it enables us to understand where the value sits. So there's some of the surveys that they've done, 90% of people relatively consistently across the global markets care about climate action in some way. If we know there's a 50 trillion value pool of assets that has some sort of ESG mandate, according to Bloomberg, that's a 45 trillion value pool that cares in some way around climate action. Now, that's bigger than the S&P 500 and the FTSE 350 combined. It's a huge amount of capital. And if we're able to demonstrably show that these companies, through their supply chain, are doing the right thing from a climate action perspective, they can access that capital pool. Their share price goes up.
Yeah.
But we're also seeing that companies like lenders are prepared to provide lower rates for debt if you're able to demonstrate you're doing the right thing, because it reduces their financed emissions. We can see that actually by doing the right thing in that space and demonstrating it, you get access to better talent because more employees want to work for you, and increasingly people want to buy from organisations that are doing the right thing from a consumer's perspective. But
just to intervene, because we sort of know, I suppose, the dynamics of that. The question is, how do you get the data which shows that demand signal and get it at scale and make it comparable and be useful by these asset managers who need to allocate this capital? And that seems to be where we keep getting stuck. And
yeah, so it's a great point. And one of the things that and this is where we're working at the moment with some of the asset managers and the banks, but also organisations like PwC and Microsoft and others, is actually collecting that information from an individual perspective. As an individual, I have different roles. I'm a consumer, I'm an employee, I'm an investor, and I'm a citizen. And I hold myself potentially to different levels of account on the things I care about under each one of those. But I have a view from a values perspective. Now, collecting that individually by via the banks, by organisations like Microsoft and PwC from a staff perspective, but also sort of mass consumer engagement is something that is being looked at later in the year. I can then, as an individual, I own that data, as that's part of the Rewired.earth model, and I can decide who I share that data with. So right. My bank, my supermarket, etc. Now, as those value pools take shape, so if I'm from an asset management perspective or a pension perspective, I'm able to say, this is what I care about and this is the amount of money I have. So that might be a £10,000 pension pot, or in terms of how I'm spending money at Tesco, for example. That enables those value pools to be understood in a different way. So there's 3 trillion roughly of assets, pension assets in the UK. If we were all able to do this, and we knew that 90% of the public cared about climate, that's a 2.7 trillion value pool in the UK that cares in some way and will respond in some way to climate. So there is that element of it, and the asset managers are interested in this because it gives them a clear and transparent view of, when they talk about ESG, what that actually means for the user of the fund. Yeah. So essentially there are different elements, if you like, in terms of the capture of the demand side data, but that is therefore creating the value pools that boards can then respond to and say, well, actually, if we do the right thing around climate action, I can access this increased share price, but also increased talent, lower cost of debt, maybe cheaper tax. Those are some of the conversations that are going on. But that increases my profit. And as my profit and my total shareholder return kicks in, my long-term incentive plan kicks in as a director, and I get paid more. Now, as I get paid more for doing the right thing, for the first time, the market becomes the most protective force on the planet, because it actually drives a set of behaviours that prices in the values of the users of the market.
Got it. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
So yeah, it does make sense. And you're sort of talking about self-sovereign data. That idea has been around for some time, but it seems quite hard to actually capture the public's imagination, to understand what that really means, to know when to actually give that across safely. I suppose open banking is a big scale project, which is about making my data available to institutions who can use that to do various comparisons and get me better products and services, etc. Is that what we're talking about here, or something different with Rewired.earth?
It's similar. I think the key here is that the data is, the decision about who it's shared with is very much the end user, if you like, the individual. But the more you share your data and the more data you give to the model, and there's, as you can imagine, huge amounts of work going on with large tech houses to make sure that it's all completely protected, but also it has all of the appropriate GDPR protections and et cetera, as you'd expect. The more data that you share, and that will be on an aggregated basis rather than individual for a lot of these things, the more value it creates for the things you care about. Because if you want to understand what do 16 to 22-year-olds in London care about in terms of a marketing campaign, being able to identify that and then essentially use the money that is created by having that data set to fund the things that those 16 to 22-year-olds care about in London.
Yeah.
That's super powerful. So there is a piece around, actually, at the moment, there is no way of providing a collective voice for individuals that can communicate to corporates and governments and banks, etc. This is essentially creating that voice for the public that enables.
How would this manifest itself? Obviously, there's, we're seeing TV campaigns for organizations out there that are saying, we're going to change the game, watch some adverts, and we'll change the world through a demand side. How does Rewired Earth manifest itself? Am I as a consumer going to be looking at an app or a campaign? Is it going to be embedded in other organizations? Give us a sense of the roadmap, if you will, and then we'll come back to the back end side, if you will.
So if you look forward, let's say, in 3 to 5 years' time, where we'd like to get to working with the sort of Rewiredearth team is, as an investor, you log on to your funds platform, and one of the things you're scanning different funds, but actually you can see that a fund today is red. It won't match your values, but you can also see that in the next 2 years it moves amber on a couple of things that you care about, and then by year 4 it moves to green. Now, what that means, I can have a forward look at the intention of the fund and the underlying assets within it, and I can see that by year 4, actually it is what I care about and it matches my values. So for the first time, I can understand that I'm investing now in something that I wouldn't necessarily invest in with a view to making that good, and therefore I'm investing in the transition I want to see. And from a consumer perspective, at the end of my supermarket shop, for example, I can see that for this, it might flag to me there are 3 products in your shopping basket that if you changed those to these, you'd move from 75% aligned with your values to 95% aligned. Now, I might decide to do that or not. This isn't about the police. This is more about education and information. But that sort of behaviour nudging does 2 things. Firstly, it means I'm educated as a user. I start to understand the impact I'm having. But secondly, as I start to move away from things that are impactful, I start to change the positioning of the supermarket, for example. They can change the supply chains they're using. They can buy less from far-flung countries that might be impacting their carbon footprint for their reporting. Now, it becomes a virtuous circle at that point, because as it then feeds through into their reporting to investors and the markets and the banks, they're starting to get better access to capital, debt, talent, and customer. So actually that then moves back into the directors being paid more, and so the whole thing becomes a virtuous circle. So I think those are examples of the way that the app will then start to create the right market.
Gotcha. Yeah.
For the investors to then investors and consumers to support the shift.
And the only other question I would ask, I suppose, is today, a few years ago when I started this, I looked at my portfolio and I wanted it to be green, and it sort of told me it was greenish, but it could tell me it's dark green now, but I don't really know whether it is or it isn't. So you spoke about audit earlier on and sort of provenance of data. How do you at Rewiredearth enable that truth telling through the system and correction when it isn't?
It's a really good point, because at the moment what happens is, as I was saying earlier, the more you look, the worse you look in a way. And often in some reporting types, if you don't report, you're given the average of the industry. So if you're really terrible, that doesn't sound like a bad plan.
Yeah.
What we quite like about the Rewiredearth model is, if you're not looking, you're red. So you get the worst score if you're not providing data, and if you're not looking through your supply chain, you get the worst score.
Yeah.
Now, you might still be red when you look through your supply chain, but the only way that you can get from red to amber and amber to green is by understanding your supply chain, starting to deal with the issues within it, and then essentially move yourselves, essentially up, reducing your impact, essentially.
Yeah.
Now, there are a number of things that we're looking at around how to do that fast. So at the moment, some of the questions that are being asked by the regulations or some of the reporting are really complicated, like 300 data points. And that excludes then a large portion of the market, because they haven't got, small and medium enterprises just haven't got the resources to be able to do that. So what we're working with sort of industry experts, academics for each of the squares, is what's the 1 to 4 things under each one of these boxes that, if we measured them consistently globally with a level of assurance that is easy to collect, will move the needle in that box.
Yeah.
So that enables everybody to step in. It enables us to build the backbone through the supply chain. Now, that's working with the ledger providers and others, and we're having those conversations at the moment as to how to make that really easy, so everyone can access that. As that happens and we build the backbone, we can actually make the question more difficult. But if we start with a difficult question, it's really difficult for people to engage.
Yeah. So you can ratchet up over time.
Exactly. So you get the transparency, you get the look through, you get the depth of your supply chain, and then we can get better and better data over time. And this is about not letting perfect get in the way of good.
Absolutely.
You know, we've got a lot of things being measured, but nothing that then tells the value case of doing the right thing.
Yeah.
So it's essentially that's the connection that Rewired.earth provides.
And people need to go up to your website, rewiredearth.com, I think.
So yes, Rewired.earth, and there's
Rewired.earth, sorry. And go there, because then we've been talking about this box and this matrix and the nuance within it, which is difficult to really talk about verbally. So people should go there and have a look at it. And I think what they'll see then is this the layered nuance that we've been talking about, actually the way that you're cleverly trying to manifest that in the representation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you know, if there are questions that arise, there's a way to contact the Rewired.earth team. And because it's quite a broad market collaboration, it's just starting to ask your suppliers or your tech providers if they're already using the tool, for example.
Fantastic. Well, look, we could talk for hours, I'm sure, but people probably got lives to get on with. Thanks so much for giving us all that information. I look forward to hearing more as the journey unfolds. But for now, David, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks very much, Richard.